Hive Fleet is a physics-driven airship combat game combined with the sensors gameplay from flight simulators and the strategic fleet movement gameplay from naval simulators. With quality in graphic, audio, and user interface uncommon for an indie game. It takes place in a distant future where methane-fueled airships fight for supremacy over the fictional country of Gerat. Geographically, it appears to be inspired by Central Asian regions that border the south of Russia. Characters have a mix of distinctly Middle Eastern and Slavic names. The scenario can be described as a post-apocalyptic Mad Max scenario with a Cold War equipment. While the scenario has some fantastic and mystical elements, it remains firmly rooted in realism, both in appearance and gameplay. It is a world of 37 and 57mm ship guns, methane fuel, radar systems, electronic warfare, and tactical missiles. NPCs were improvised Cold War and even World War II equipment adapted to the desert environment. The game is divided into 3 parts: the real-time ship-to-ship combat, strategic movement on the world map, and ship management when landed at cities. Real-time combat starts when a ship from the player's fleet encounters ships from the enemy fleets or city garrisons. The gameplay is physics-driven, and the ships are controlled by the WSD keys for movement and Q and E for rotation. The goal is to, quite literally, shoot enemy ships to pieces until they are no longer able to fly. This part of the game is presented in staggering visual detail for a 2D game. Smoke, fire, and lighting effects are close to photorealistic. Ship thrusters produce fiery exhaust flames and thick smoke plumes. Missile starts during nighttime coat the area in a harsh white light, and ammo detonations create spectacular explosions whose smoke effects linger long after the carcass of the destroyed ship accelerates to the ground. And over all this chaos, a realistic flight sim head-up display attempts to provide the player with targeting information. It is fuzzy and flickers, and itself is exposed to the violence of the situation as it shakes, vibrates, and shifts colors as your own ship takes damage. Gameplay depth is higher than it might appear at first glance. Ships have various guns, ammo types, missiles, and ways to defend against them. Either by speed, which subjects the ship to G-forces, or defensive systems like flares to distract the infrared sensors of missiles. The audio is flawless. Tactical missiles emit a powerful hiss, flares sound like crisp fireworks, 37mm guns rattle with low-frequency buzzing. On the strategic screen, the background audio is so subtle you might not notice it as even there. It is backfilled by the soothing sound of ambient background humming, the sound of computer systems of the Cold War. A terrifying sound, as most players who play on hard difficulty might agree with, is the sound of a radar officer knocking on the door and saying the magical words of
"Warning, radar emission detected."
Because that sound flips the quiet serenity into a grim standoff atmosphere one might experience from a submarine movie. That tension is increased if it is followed by the same officer saying
"Thermal signature detected."
as this means, in most cases, that an enemy strike group has successfully acquired your fleet and you find yourself on the wrong end of a tactical missile strike.
Attention, new target on the radar.
The strategic layer of the game lets the player order his fleet around on the map to conquer cities with the ultimate goal to reach Khiva, a city in the far north. This layer feels simple at first and reveals its depth as the player explores the possibilities. The player can order his fleets around, make use of sensor systems, decryption systems, order planes on missions, and order tactical missile strikes. A big part of this part of the game is to figure out what cities to attack and how to avoid getting attacked by other fleets. City garrisons are easily defeated. However, enemy fleets, so-called strike groups, can, depending on the difficulty level, outright end the game for the player by destroying his flagship or wear down the player's fleet to a point where the player runs out of fuel or money. This can happen by direct combat, where the enemy fleet engages directly, or by sending planes or tactical missiles. The presentation of this part of the game is beautiful. The main screen has a slight curvature like an old CRT monitor. Ships and missiles have clear functional symbology that will get flight sim players excited. And the naval sim players will like the pencil, ruler, and compass that can be used to mark locations and measure distances. Easily, the biggest chunk of gameplay in this section is sensors. The game features radars, radar warning receivers, infrared sensors, and radio decryption minigame. The visual representation of the sensors is distinct and realistic. Radars show contacts fade in after each pulse, while radar warning receivers provide a much coarser directional warning that a hostile radar was detected. The main purpose of these sensors is to find targets and avoid ending up as one. It is up to the player to piece together a tactical situation, and getting it right feels rewarding, as the game does not explicitly spell out enemy fleet 600 kilometers north. In most cases, all the player gets is a radar blip that could be within a 30-degree range cone of north. And to detect what type of target is often requires ingenuity on the side of the player. The radar contact could be examined closer by sending in a recon plane, or by inferring from the behavior of the target whether it is a mighty strike group or a freighter. If the sensors gameplay was successful, or unsuccessful if you are the target, then you may find yourself firing missiles or being on the wrong end of it. Tactical missiles are the most feared weapons in High Fleet. They can be fired at a target without engaging with your fleet directly. All it takes is to find a target, select a missile, and send it on its way. If the missile finds its target, the game switches into real-time combat, and the missile can be seen approaching the target at high speed, while the targeted ships try to shoot it down. Here the game also draws from realism. There are various missiles with different types of tracking mechanisms. Some require a target to come within the cone of its seeker, anti-radar missiles will home onto ships with active radars. It is a game where pieces are perfectly fitted together to create an engaging experience where the depth can be explored by the player as far as he wants, and as far the difficulty pushes him into. And unlike most indie games, the visual and audio representation is beautiful, realistic, and intuitive. And there's an uncompromising perfection to it. Uncompromising because the developer could have made it easier on himself by having a unified UI, where there's one style for the whole game and call it finished. However, he did the opposite. Targeting MFD is what I would consider the single greatest piece of in-game UI ever. It is readable at a glance, beautiful, and retains a retro Cold War aesthetic without using its retroness as an excuse for bad low-effort graphics. The same goes for the HUD overlays in both tactical combat and the landing minigame. Understandable at a glance, and the glow of the HUD creates that feel of looking at a collimator with the symbols projected on a piece of glass. The gameplay offers depth in most areas, which is partly because of how the different layers are connected. Decisions made in the strategic layer play into the tactical layer, and the other way around too. A missile strike or a daring bomber plane formation attack might take out some of the target's fleet's tactical missiles, which exposes them for frontal assaults by your fleet, as the initial missile firepower will be reduced. Or a destroyed fire control radar might make a ship of the enemy fleet unable to fire anti-air missiles at incoming tactical missiles. Or a damaged fuel tank on the enemy flagship might slow the fleet down so you can outrun it. All of which can also happen the other way around to your fleet, because the game is consequential in the way it replicates the effects of a ship's condition onto the strategic layer. And here lies the depth of the strategic layer, to figure out the shortcomings and strength of your fleet and the enemy fleets. On the tactical layer, depth is provided by the player's skill in aiming weapon systems and positioning his own ship. Different ammo types add specialty, and the ship design itself increases this depth. Ship design in Hive Fleet is very engaging. Ships are an assembly of different modules that try to perform their function as intended. Combat damage creates little cascading catastrophes, where ships suffer thruster damage, which decreases mobility, crew deaths, which decrease the performance of the weapon systems as there are fewer men to operate them. And ammo detonations, which create spectacular explosions that will in most situations outright tear small ships to pieces and leave large ships limping away from combat as defective hulks. The game comes with a ship editor which is intuitive and deep, as the possibilities to create ships are vast. And when played on hard mode, the optimistic designs a player might create get hammered into shape by exposing their weaknesses. It can be very addictive to go back to the editor after a campaign to modify existing ship design from previous experiences. And the good part is that there's never a perfect ship. It is always a trade-off between different things. Heavy armor protects against fire, however it makes the ship heavier and will cost more fuel to move it. This leads to players creating highly specialized designs, which are then exposed to the harsh campaign experience, where players struggle to have their finely designed ships try to hold on to the doctrine which dictated their shape. A light tactical missile carrier with no armor is very fuel efficient because it can save on extra weight by avoiding direct combat. And having other ships with the fleet provide defensive fire against tactical missiles. However, if that other support ship is already dead or the player has to sell it to buy fuel, then it creates a slowly spiraling catastrophe which pushes the player to improvise.